Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight we're exploring the absolutely devastating, soul-crushing, existentially horrifying story of Ahri, the nine-tailed fox who's basically been having an identity crisis for like 300 years. And when I say devastating, I don't mean like missing a canon minion devastating. I'm talking about accidentally becoming a serial killer, absorbing hundreds of people's memories, and spending literal centuries wondering if you're even a real person or just a collection of stolen souls. Kind of devastating. This is what happens when Riot's writers looked at a cute fox character and said, you know what this needs? Psychological torture and an unending cycle of guilt and predation. Really feels like they took one look at the champion design team's cute fox girl and said, let's make her suffer more than a top laner against a ranged matchup with no jungle pressure. So before we get into this absolute tragedy, do me a favor and hit that like button if you're vibing with these sleep stories, subscribe if you want more lore deep dives, and comment your main champion plus whether you've ever had an existential crisis during a ranked game. Because I guarantee Ahri's having a worse one. No judgment here. We're all just trying to make sense of this cursed game and its even more cursed lore. Alright, now get comfortable. Dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan or some rain sounds. Put your phone on Do Not Disturb, because we both know you're about to drift off halfway through this video. Grab some water, get under those covers, and let's talk about some truly unhinged Ionian lore. But real quick, think about this. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to not know what species you are? Like, imagine waking up one day and realizing you're not actually human, you're something else entirely, and you've been living a lie your whole life. What would it feel like to be so hungry for connection that you literally drain people's life force just to feel whole? How does someone go from being an innocent animal to becoming a gorgeous, powerful, deeply traumatized magical being who can't stop killing the very people she wants to connect with? Is that worse than demoting from plat to gold? Or is it like cosmically worse? And could you survive even one day in Ahri's position without completely losing your mind? Because spoiler alert, she barely does. Alright, congratulations. You've just spawned into the forests of Ionia, back before the Noxian invasion, back when magic flowed freely through the land, and spirits walked among mortals. The year is sometime in the distant past. Riot's never been great with timelines, so just vibe with it. You're a fox. Just a regular fox. You have no idea you're actually Vastayan. You have no abilities unlocked, and your entire life is about to get ruined by one chance encounter with a dying human. You have no flash, no cleanse, and absolutely no way to escape the curse you're about to stumble into. Welcome to Ahri's origin story. Good luck, because you're gonna need it. Alright, so let's talk about where Ahri actually comes from. Because spoiler alert, she wasn't always the nine-tailed menace deleting your ADC from Fog of War. Before Ahri became the AP assassin that haunts your nightmares and your match history, she was born as a Vastaya in the magical forests of Ionia. Now, if you don't know what a Vastaya is, imagine if humans and ancient magical spirit animals had a child, and that child could shapeshift and had a connection to magic that would make Rise jealous. Vastaya are basically what happens when Riot said, you know what this world needs? Furries with lore justification. And honestly, they committed to it. Ahri's tribe lived deep in the wilderness, connected to nature, in a way that makes Ivern look like he just downloaded a plant identification app. These weren't your average league champions. These were beings who could feel the pulse of the world itself, who understood magic on a level that most mages spend their entire lives trying to reach, and who definitely didn't need to check the wiki to understand their abilities. The Vastaya could shapeshift between animal and humanoid forms as naturally as you switch between farming and fighting. They could sense the emotional currents of living beings around them like you sense when your jungler is about to gank your lane, and they lived in complete harmony with the magical energy that flowed through Ionia like mana through your champion. Ahri's parents were part of this ancient lineage, fox spirits who had existed for generations, passing down their knowledge and magic through bloodlines that stretched back before Runeterra even had a proper timeline. They lived in hidden groves where cherry blossoms fell year-round regardless of season, where the air itself hummed with spiritual energy strong enough that you could taste it, where the boundary between the physical world and the spirit realm was so thin you could practically walk between them if you knew how. It was peaceful, it was beautiful, and it was absolutely nothing like the absolute chaos that Ahri's life was about to become. Because here's the thing about being born into ancient magical bloodlines. Sometimes the magic doesn't express itself the way anyone expects, and sometimes you end up being the one Vastaya in your entire tribe who's fundamentally different from everyone else in ways nobody can explain. The elders would examine young Ahri with confusion written across their ancient faces, consulting scrolls that documented centuries of Vastayan births, trying to find any precedent for a kid whose magic felt simultaneously too powerful and completely inaccessible. They'd perform diagnostic rituals, watch her play with other children, observe her interactions with the forest spirits that drifted through their grove, and every time they'd come to the same conclusion. Something was different about this one, something unprecedented, something they didn't have the knowledge to understand or fix. Her parents tried not to show their worry, tried to treat Ahri like any other Vastayan child, but even as a kid, she could sense their concern radiating off them like heat from a flame. The other Vastayan families would whisper when they thought she couldn't hear, wondering if maybe the bloodline had been corrupted somehow, if some outside magical influence had affected her in the womb, if this was some kind of curse or test from the spirits. Nobody had answers, and in a society built around understanding and controlling magic, having no answers was terrifying for everyone involved. Now here's where it gets weird, because Ahri didn't start as the confident, seductive fox spirit, from all those KDA skins you definitely didn't spend way too much money on. She was just a fox, like an actual fox. A little kit running around the Ionian forests, chasing butterflies and doing whatever foxes do when they're not getting picked in your ranked games. But here's the thing. Ahri was different from the other foxes, even from birth, in ways that became more obvious as she grew. She had this inexplicable connection to magic that she couldn't understand, couldn't control, and definitely couldn't explain to the other forest creatures who were just trying to live their best wildlife documentary lives. While other Vastayan fox kits could shift between forms naturally by the time they were a few months old, like it was just another ability in their kit that unlocked automatically, Ahri was stuck. She was locked in her fox form, unable to access the shape-shifting that should have been her birthright, that should have been as natural as breathing. Imagine being born with this insane potential for power, but you're literally just a small fox with no concept of what that even means. It's like spawning into a ranked game as a level 1 champion, but you're playing against a full-build late-game hypercarry, except the hypercarry is your own magical essence, and you don't even know what buttons to press yet. Her parents tried everything. Rituals passed down through generations, meditations that had worked for countless Vastayan children before her, consulting with elder Vastaya who had seen centuries of magical phenomena and thought they'd encountered every variation of Vastayan development. Nothing worked. Ahri remained a fox, aware that she was supposed to be more, feeling the magic churning inside her with nowhere to go, like having full mana, but all your abilities are on cooldown permanently. The sensation was maddening even for a young kid. She could feel the power inside her, this massive reservoir of magical energy that pressed against her consciousness like water against a dam. But she had no way to channel it, no way to release it, no way to use it for anything productive. The other Vastayan children would shift and play, practicing their human forms and animal forms, learning to navigate both worlds, understanding the balance between their dual natures. They'd spend hours in the grove transforming back and forth, showing off for each other, competing to see who could shift fastest or hold their form longest. And Ahri would watch from the edges, this small fox sitting beneath the cherry trees, feeling that massive reservoir of magic inside her but unable to access it, unable to participate, unable to be what she was supposed to be. Her parents loved her, of course. They tried to tell her that maybe she was just a late bloomer, that maybe her magic would manifest differently, that she was still Vastayan regardless of what form she wore. That form didn't define identity, but you could see the worry in their eyes, the confusion when they thought she wasn't looking, the quiet conversations they'd have late at night when they assumed she was sleeping. Because in a society built around shape-shifting and magical balance, being stuck in one form wasn't just unusual, it was unheard of. There were no stories about it, no legends, no historical records of a Vastayan child who simply couldn't shapeshift. It was like a fish that couldn't swim or a bird that couldn't fly. Technically possible, but so rare that nobody had documentation on how to handle it. The elders suggested that maybe Ahri's magic was dormant, waiting for some trigger or catalyst that would activate it when the time was right. They told her parents to be patient, to let her develop naturally, to not force anything. But years passed, and Ahri remained a fox, growing larger, but never changing forms. Her magic still trapped inside her like a caged animal that couldn't find the exit. Okay, so this next part? Absolutely unhinged, and it's basically the moment that sets Ahri's entire tragic existence into motion. Picture this. You're Ahri. You're still just a fox, maybe 5 or 6 years old in fox years, which is young but not a complete baby anymore, vibing in the Ionian wilderness because you've started wandering farther from your tribe's grove since watching the other Vastian children shapeshift was getting too depressing. And you come across a dying human hunter. This guy had been out hunting, probably trying to get some food for his family or whatever people did in ancient Ionia before Noxus showed up to ruin everything. And he's just lying there in a small clearing, bleeding out from wounds that suggest he'd been attacked by something. Maybe a wild animal. Maybe he'd fallen from a cliff. Maybe he'd been in the wrong place during a territorial dispute between magical creatures. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that he's dying. And Ahri, curious little fox that she is, approaches him cautiously. She can feel something radiating from him. Something warm, something beautiful, something that calls to that weird magical connection she's always had but never understood. It's his life essence, his literal soul energy fading as he dies, glowing to her magical senses like a beacon in the darkness, like the most attractive thing she's ever sensed in her entire young life. The hunter sees her, this small fox approaching through the undergrowth, and in his final moments he reaches out, maybe finding some comfort in not dying alone, maybe just wanting to touch something living one last time before the end. His hand is trembling, covered in blood, and when Ahri gets close enough, his fingers brush against her fur. And that touch creates a connection, a magical link between his fading essence and her trapped power. And Ahri, driven by pure instinct she doesn't even comprehend, by a magical imperative she has no conscious control over, absorbs it. She takes his final memories, his emotions, his very essence into herself in one massive rush of energy and information, and it feels incredible. It's like the first time you get a pentakill, except instead of feeling proud, you've just accidentally consumed someone's entire existence, and you're a fox who has no idea what just happened or why it felt so impossibly right. The sensation is overwhelming. Suddenly Ahri has memories that aren't hers, emotions she doesn't understand, thoughts in a language she shouldn't be able to comprehend but somehow does. She sees flashes of the hunter's life playing out in her mind like a movie on fast forward. His childhood in a small Ionian village, the woman he loved and married when he was barely more than a boy, the daughter who had been born just 3 months ago, the desperation that drove him to hunt in dangerous territories because his family needed food and the easier hunting grounds had been depleted. She feels his fear as whatever attacked him tore into his flesh, his resignation as he realized he was too far from help to survive, his sorrow at leaving his young family behind, and his strange peace at the end when he saw the fox and decided that at least he wouldn't die completely alone. It's like downloading someone's entire life story directly into your brain in the span of seconds, except it's not just information. It's lived experience, emotional memory, the actual feeling of being someone else, and the magic inside her. That magic that had been trapped and dormant for her entire life, it surges, it activates, it finally finds the outlet it had been searching for, and the sensation is like finally being able to breathe after drowning for years. Ahri's body begins to glow with spiritual energy. That fox form she'd been locked in suddenly feeling less permanent, less fixed, like reality had become more malleable around her. The hunter's body crumbles to ash as his essence fully transfers, leaving no physical remains, and Ahri stumbles away from the scene, her mind reeling, her magic awakening, and absolutely no understanding of what she's just done, or what she's become, or what this means for her future. Let me tell you about the most grieving moment in Ahri's entire existence, the moment she realized she wasn't a fox anymore. But she also wasn't human, and she definitely wasn't okay. After absorbing that hunter's essence, something fundamental changed in Ahri. The magic that had always been dormant inside her suddenly activated like a level 6 power spike, except instead of just getting an ultimate ability, she got an entire identity crisis wrapped in a transformation sequence that would last for weeks. Her body began to change, to take on a more humanoid form, influenced by the human memories now living inside her mind. Over the course of days, maybe weeks, time got weird when your entire biological structure is rewriting itself at the cellular level. Ahri transformed. Her fox body stretched and reshaped, bones restructuring themselves with sensations that ranged from uncomfortable to agonizing, limbs elongating from paws into something resembling arms and legs, her consciousness expanding to accommodate new ways of thinking and perceiving that came with a more complex brain structure. Imagine waking up one day and you're suddenly a completely different species. You have hands instead of paws, and you don't know how to use them. You can think in ways you never could before, but those thoughts are mixed with memories of someone else's life. But you also have someone else's memories floating around in your head like the worst kind of brain fog. It's like getting autofilled to a role you've never played, except the role is being human, and there's no tutorial, no practice tool, and definitely no one to flame when you mess it up. The transformation wasn't clean or instant like shapeshifting was supposed to be for Vastaya. It was messy and gradual and painful, like her body couldn't quite figure out what it was supposed to become. She'd wake up each day to find herself slightly more humanoid than before, her muzzle shortening into something resembling a human face, her fur receding in some places but remaining in others, tails multiplying behind her because apparently her magic decided that if one tail was good, 9 would be better. Ahri stumbled through the forest on 2 legs instead of 4, her new form awkward and unfamiliar, constantly falling over because bipedal locomotion is actually really complicated when you've spent your entire life as a quadruped. She could speak now, form words in that human language she'd absorbed from the hunter's memories, but her voice was wrong, too rough, like she was using vocal cords that hadn't quite figured out their purpose yet. And the memories, The hunter's memories were constantly intruding on her thoughts, making it hard to distinguish between what she'd actually experienced and what she'd absorbed. She'd reach for something and have a flash of the hunter reaching for his bow, feel hungry and remember his daughter's face, see her reflection in a stream, and expect to see his face instead of whatever strange fox-girl hybrid she'd become. She tried to return to her Vastayan tribe, to her parents, to the only home she'd ever known, stumbling through the forest for days until she found the hidden grove. But when she arrived, they didn't recognize her. This strange humanoid creature with fox ears and multiple tails, covered in a mixture of fur and skin, moving with the awkward uncertainty of something that hadn't quite figured out how to inhabit its own body. That wasn't their daughter. Their daughter was a fox kit who couldn't shapeshift, and whoever or whatever this was, it wasn't her. Ahri tried to explain, tried to tell them what had happened using words that felt foreign in her mouth. But how do you explain that you accidentally ate someone's soul and it fundamentally transformed you? How do you make people understand that you're still you when you're not sure that's even true anymore? Her parents were terrified, and not the kind of terror that comes from immediate danger, the kind that comes from seeing something that breaks your understanding of how the world works. The other Vastaya were even more so, backing away from her like she was diseased, which in a magical sense she probably was. This wasn't natural transformation. This wasn't the Vastayan magic they understood. This was something else, something that smelled of death and human essence and power that violated the natural order. They drove her away, not violently, not with hatred, but with fear and confusion and the desperate need to protect the rest of the tribe from whatever their daughter had become. The elders performed a ritual of severance, cutting Ahri off from the tribal magic, declaring that she was no longer part of their people. And Ahri left, walking into the wilderness alone, more lost than she'd ever been as a fox, because at least then she'd known what she was. Now she was something unprecedented, something wrong, carrying a dead man's memories and a hunger she was just beginning to understand would define the rest of her very long existence. Now here's where Ahri's story goes from tragic to absolutely brutal, because that first taste of human essence, it wasn't just a one-time thing. It awakened something in her, a hunger, an addiction that would define the next several centuries of her existence. The life essence she absorbed didn't just change her body, it rewired her entire being to crave it, to need it, like you need LP to climb ranks. Except this addiction is way worse than your ranked addiction, because every time Ahri feeds this hunger, someone actually dies. At first, she didn't understand what was happening. She'd been living in the wilderness for a few weeks after her tribe cast her out, trying to figure out her new body, learning how to walk on two legs without face planting, discovering that hands were actually incredibly useful once you figured out the whole finger coordination thing. And then she felt it, this gnawing emptiness inside her, this aching void that demanded to be filled. It started as discomfort, like missing a cannon minion, annoying but manageable. But it grew into actual pain over the course of days, like your whole body was taking true damage from the inside out, like every cell in your body was screaming that something was wrong and needed to be fixed immediately. She'd feel weak, her magic flickering and unstable, her transformed body struggling to maintain its shape, like she was losing cohesion at a fundamental level. Her tails would fade in and out of visibility, her humanoid features would revert partially to fox characteristics, and she'd feel this terrible pulling sensation like her entire being wanted to unmake itself. And then she'd encounter another human, a traveler passing through the forest, just some random person who had no idea they were about to become someone's meal. And that hunger would spike so intensely, it was like someone had turned up the volume on every sense she had. She could smell their life essence from hundreds of feet away, could sense it like you sense the enemy jungler in the fog of war, even when you can't see them. And it called to her with an intensity that made rational thought almost impossible. The first few times after her initial transformation, she resisted. She tried to fight it, tried to convince herself she didn't need it, that she could be better than this, that she could just ignore the pain and maybe it would go away eventually. Spoiler alert, it didn't go away. It got worse. The pain intensified until she could barely move, until her vision was blurring, until she was essentially in the equivalent of a magical diabetic coma from lack of life essence. And eventually, inevitably, when her body was breaking down and she was maybe hours from actual death, Ahri would give in. She'd approach whatever human she'd been trying to avoid, and that hunger wouldn't give her a choice anymore. It would take over, use her natural charm and her Vastayan magic to lure them close, and before she fully understood what was happening, she'd be touching them, and that connection would open and their essence would flow into her like water through a broken dam. And the relief was immediate and overwhelming. The pain vanished, her magic surged back to full strength, her body solidified into its transformed shape, and she felt alive and powerful and whole again for approximately 10 seconds. Then the guilt would hit like a truck. Then the new memories would flood in like water, drowning her consciousness. Then she'd be standing over another body crumbling to ash, another life stolen, another person whose entire existence now lived inside her mind alongside the hunter and whoever else she'd consumed in those early desperate days. She's basically forced to main a champion whose entire kit revolves around mechanics she never asked for, and definitely doesn't want. Imagine if every time you got fed in a game, it made you physically dependent on getting more kills to function, but each kill also filled you with the guilt and memories of every champion you killed. That's Ahri's existence. She's trapped in an endless cycle of needing to consume life essence to survive, but every time she does, she becomes more human, more aware, and more haunted by what she's doing. And here's the truly messed up part. She's not even doing it for power or pleasure anymore after those first few times. She's doing it because if she doesn't, she'll literally die. It's survival. The worst possible kind of survival, where staying alive requires you to kill others, where your continued existence is predicated on ending someone else's. It's like being hard stuck in a game mode where the only way to keep playing is to delete other players' accounts, and you hate every second of it, but the alternative is uninstalling yourself from life. Ahri tried to understand the mechanics of her hunger during those early years, tried to figure out if there was any way to reduce it or control it, or satisfy it with something other than human essence. She experimented with animal life essence, hunted deer and rabbits, and tried to absorb their energy. It worked technically in that she could absorb it, but it was like trying to satisfy your hunger by eating plain rice when what your body was craving was a full meal. It barely took the edge off, and the amount of animals she'd need to consume to equal one human would probably depopulate entire forests. She tried magical alternatives, absorbing ambient magical energy from spirit-touched locations, meditating at ley line intersections where Ionia's magical power pooled. Again, it helped slightly, like taking a health potion when you need a full heal. But it wasn't enough. Her body, her magic, her very essence had become fundamentally dependent on consuming human life force, and nothing else would truly satisfy that need. So Ahri learned to live with it, learned to time her feedings to maximize the interval between them, learned to take only what she absolutely needed to survive rather than feeding fully. And she began her long, lonely journey through Ionia, hunting humans to sustain herself and hating every moment of her existence. Alright, so let's talk about what Ahri did for literal centuries after she transformed, because this is basically the longest losing streak in League history, except instead of LP, she's losing her sense of self. For hundreds of years, we're talking multiple human lifetimes, entire generations of families being born and dying while Ahri remained unchanged. She wandered through Ionia, hunting humans to feed her uncontrollable hunger. She developed patterns, strategies, methods to make it easier, which really just means methods to lie to herself about what she was doing and maybe reduce the guilt to something manageable. She'd find travelers on lonely roads, people far from home who had told no one exactly where they were going, soldiers separated from their units during regional conflicts, hermits living alone in the mountains, people who wouldn't be missed. Or at least that's what she told herself to cope with the absolute horror of what she was doing. She became an expert at reading people, at knowing who would be easiest to charm. Who was vulnerable enough to follow a beautiful stranger into the woods? Who was desperate enough, or lonely enough, or curious enough to ignore the warning signs that maybe approaching the mysterious fox girl was a terrible idea? It's manipulative, it's predatory, and it's the only way she knew how to survive. She'd watch potential targets for hours sometimes, learning their patterns, understanding their emotional states, waiting for the perfect moment to approach. She developed personas for different types of people. For travelers, she'd play the lost wanderer needing directions. For soldiers, she'd be the grateful civilian offering information about enemy movements. For the lonely, she'd be the beautiful stranger offering companionship. Each time she consumed someone's essence, she gained their memories, their emotions, their fears and hopes and dreams, and she'd carry those forever in her increasingly overcrowded mind. There was the young soldier who had been dreaming of returning home to his childhood sweetheart, who'd been counting down the days until his service ended, who'd been writing letters he never got to send. The traveling merchant who'd been worried about gambling debts, who'd been running from loan sharks in the city, who'd seen Ahri as a possible mark to rob before she turned the tables on him. The farmer's daughter who had run away from an arranged marriage, seeking freedom and adventure in the wider world, who'd trusted Ahri because she seemed like another young woman traveling alone. The elderly monk who had been on a pilgrimage to sacred sites across Ionia, who'd accumulated a lifetime of wisdom and peace that all transferred to Ahri in his final moments. Each one added their story to Ahri's overcrowded mind. Each one made her more human and less herself. Each one was another weight on her conscience that she'd carry forever. It's like if every champion you killed in ranked added their entire match history and emotional baggage to your brain. Eventually, you'd go insane. Eventually, you'd be carrying around so much trauma from so many different lives that you wouldn't even know who you were anymore. And that's exactly what happened to Ahri. She'd have moments where she couldn't remember if a memory was hers or someone she'd consumed. Was that childhood memory of playing by a river from her time as a fox kit with her Vastayan parents? Or was it from the fisher boy she'd killed in her third year of wandering? She'd feel emotions that belonged to dead people bubbling up at random times, sudden grief for children she'd never had, love for people she'd never met, fear of situations that had never happened to her. She'd dream their dreams and fear their fears and carry their regrets like they were her own. The boundaries of her identity became blurred, like playing so many champions that you forget your main, except the champions are actual people, and the game is your consciousness. Ahri wandered from region to region within Ionia, never staying long enough for people to notice the pattern of disappearances that followed her, never forming real connections, because what's the point when you're an immortal monster who might eventually consume anyone who gets close to you? She watched civilizations grow and change from the shadows, saw generations of families live and die, observed the slow evolution of Ionian society as decades turned into centuries. She saw villages grow into towns, watched as trade routes expanded and shifted, observed as regional conflicts flared and resolved, and through it all she remained, feeding her hunger, collecting memories like the world's worst trading card collection, and slowly losing any sense of who Ahri the Vastayan fox kid had been before that first taste of human essence changed everything. The worst part wasn't even the killing, though that was horrific enough. It was the loneliness. Ahri lived for centuries without a single genuine connection to another being, without anyone who knew what she was, without anyone she could talk to about the absolute nightmare her existence had become. She was surrounded by people. The humans she hunted lived in communities, had families and friends, lived interconnected lives full of relationships and meaning. And Ahri could only watch from the outside, could only pretend to be one of them for brief periods before her hunger forced her to feed and move on. She carried hundreds of lives worth of memories about love and friendship and family, but none of them were actually hers. They were stolen experiences, secondhand emotions, the echoes of lives she'd ended. It's like watching streams of other people playing League and having all their memories of climbing ranked, but you yourself have never actually played a game, and also you killed all those streamers to get their memories. Not great for your mental health, turns out. Now here's where it gets weird, because Ahri realized she couldn't just keep running through the forest eating people's souls like some kind of magical vacuum cleaner set to the traumatize yourself forever setting. She needed to be smarter about it, more strategic, less likely to get caught and killed by angry villagers with pitchforks. So she started using her Vastayan magic more deliberately to appear fully human, to blend into villages and cities, to wear a mask of normalcy over the monster she believed herself to be. Think of it like smurfing, except instead of pretending to be a lower rank, she's pretending to be a species she's not, and instead of stomping noobs, she's trying not to accidentally consume everyone around her while also definitely planning to eventually consume someone around her, because that's how survival works for her. Ahri became a master of deception over the decades and centuries of practice, learning human customs in exhaustive detail, understanding speech patterns and regional dialects, studying social behaviors and cultural norms until she could mimic them perfectly. She'd study a town for days or even weeks before entering, watching how people interacted from hidden positions in the surrounding wilderness, noting what they wore and how they spoke and what stories they told and what they valued. She'd observe their festivals and religious practices, understand their local politics and family dynamics, figure out the social hierarchy and who held power and who was marginalized. Then she'd construct an identity that would fit seamlessly into their society. Maybe a traveling entertainer with stories from distant regions, or a merchant's daughter seeking new opportunities after her father's business failed, or a widow looking to start fresh in a new place away from painful memories. She'd walk into town with a complete backstory that she'd constructed from stolen memories and careful observation, manufactured details that would answer any questions people might ask, and a smile that made people trust her instantly thanks to that Vastayan charm magic she'd learned to weaponize. That charm magic didn't hurt either. She could make people feel at ease around her, make them want to help her, make them ignore the little inconsistencies in her story, or the fact that she never seemed to eat normal food in public, or that she'd occasionally slip and reference events from decades ago as if she'd been there personally. It's the ultimate long con, except the prize is survival, and the cost is whatever remained of her humanity, and also someone's life eventually. Ahri would integrate herself into a community for weeks or even months, making friends and attending festivals and pretending to care about the local gossip and politics and who was marrying whom and which farmer had the best harvest this year. And all the while she'd be selecting her target, choosing her victim with the cold calculation of a predator that had been doing this for centuries. Usually someone on the outskirts of society, The town drunk whose disappearance would be attributed to them finally wandering off and falling in a ditch. The known criminal who everyone assumed had finally fled to avoid justice. The reclusive hermit who had no family and few friends to notice they were gone. She'd charm them, lure them away to somewhere private with promises that varied depending on what they wanted. Companionship for the lonely, intimacy for the desperate, business opportunities for the ambitious, spiritual enlightenment for the seekers. And then she'd feed, absorbing their essence in moments, watching their body crumble to ash, and gaining another set of memories to add to her collection. Then she'd mourn with everyone else, express appropriate concern about the missing person, help search for them knowing they'd never be found, and slowly prepare her own exit before anyone could connect the dots, or before her hunger returned and forced her to feed again in the same location. The worst part? She got good at it, really good. She could read people like you read patch notes, understanding their wants and fears and insecurities at a glance, knowing exactly what to say and how to act to make them trust her, manipulating them with the skill of someone who'd been doing this for literal centuries and had hundreds of different people's social experiences to draw on. She became exactly what she never wanted to be, a predator, skilled and efficient, wearing a human face while hunting humans for food. And every time she looked at her reflection in a stream or a polished mirror, she saw the faces of everyone she'd consumed staring back at her, judging her, asking her why she couldn't just be better, why she couldn't find another way, why their lives had to end so hers could continue. She had no good answers for them, just the same excuse every time. Because I want to live, and your life is the price of mine. And I'm sorry, but not sorry enough to stop. The self-loathing was constant and intense, but apparently not intense enough to override the survival instinct. Because Ahri kept feeding, kept hunting, kept playing her long con in village after village for centuries. Let me tell you about the absolute mental anguish Ahri went through as centuries of stolen memories piled up in her consciousness like a match history you can't delete, except every match in the history represents someone's entire life, and you have to remember all of them simultaneously forever. Every person she consumed added their entire life to her mind. Their childhood, their first love, their fears, their dreams, their moment of death, all of it dumped directly into her consciousness where it would remain forever with perfect clarity. Because apparently Vastayan memory doesn't degrade the way human memory does. Imagine having not just your own memories, but the memories of hundreds or thousands of people all existing simultaneously in your head, all equally vivid, all equally present, none of them fading or becoming less intense with time. You'd remember your own first steps, but also the first steps of every child whose parents you consumed. You'd feel your own heartbreak, but also the heartbreak of every lover, every widow, every person who died full of regret or fear or desperate hope that someone would remember them. It's like playing League with 200 ping, except the lag is existential dread and there's no server transfer option. And also the game is your consciousness and it's running 1,000 instances simultaneously, and they're all crashing into each other. Ahri's mind became a chaotic mess of identities, a fractured mirror reflecting countless lives, and through it all, she desperately tried to hold on to whatever small piece of herself still remained beneath the accumulated weight of stolen experiences. She'd have conversations with herself using voices that weren't hers, argue with memories of dead people about decisions they'd made decades or centuries ago, wake up in the middle of the night convinced she was someone else entirely, until slowly, painfully, her own identity would reassert itself. Sometimes she'd wake up and not know which body was hers, which life she was currently living, Whether she was the fox girl or the farmer or the soldier or the merchant or any of the 1,000 other people crammed into her skull, like a very uncomfortable room with very bad occupancy limits. The psychological term for this is probably something clinical and technical that requires years of medical school to fully understand. But in gaming terms, it's like your brain is running 1,000 instances of League simultaneously, and they're all lagging and crashing into each other, and none of them will close, no matter how many times you hit Alt F4. Ahri tried different coping mechanisms over the years, because even immortal fox spirits with soul-eating addictions need therapy, even if they have to provide it for themselves. She tried meditation, attempting to separate the memories into organized compartments like filing away match replays into folders by champion or date. It worked for a while, until the compartments started leaking into each, other like a badly organized file system, and she'd reach for a memory of her childhood and pull out the childhood of someone she'd consumed instead. She tried focusing only on her original memories, attempting to anchor herself to her core identity as Ahri the Vestayan Fox Kit, but after centuries of additions, she honestly couldn't remember which memories were originally hers anymore. Was that memory of playing by a river something she'd actually done as a fox kit? Or was it from the childhood of the fisherman she'd consumed in year 734 by whatever calendar Ionia used? Was that memory of learning to climb trees hers, or one of the dozens of children's memories she'd accumulated? She developed habits, repeated phrases, specific ways of moving, anything to anchor herself to some consistent identity that felt like her. She'd tell herself her own story every night like a bedtime ritual, like a prayer to the identity she was desperately trying to maintain. I am Ahri. I am Vastayan. I am a fox spirit. I did not ask for this hunger. I am not them. I am me. I am me. I am me. But the words felt hollower every time she repeated them, because how can you be yourself when yourself is buried under centuries of other people's selves? How can you maintain a coherent identity when your mind contains thousands of people's identities and they're all equally real and present? The worst moments were when she'd consume someone and their memories were so vivid, so overwhelming, so emotionally intense that she'd live as them for days or even weeks before remembering she was Ahri. She'd act out their lives, speak in their dialect, crave their favorite foods, respond to their name, pursue their goals until slowly, painfully, her own consciousness would reassert itself, and she'd realize she'd lost days or weeks to someone else's identity. It's like getting hacked and watching someone else play on your account, except the hacker is a dead person's memories, and your account is your entire consciousness. Coming back to herself after these episodes was disorienting and terrifying. She'd have to piece together what she'd done while subsumed by another identity, where she'd gone, what she'd said to people. Sometimes she'd find herself hundreds of miles from where she'd been, having traveled while living as someone else. Once she came back to herself to discover she'd been living in a village as a dead weaver woman for 6 months, had made friends as that person, had been pursuing that person's unfinished business, and had no memory of any of it as herself. Okay, so this next part is absolutely unhinged, because Ahri discovered that Ionia has these mystical places where the spirit realm and the physical world overlap, and one of them is called the Garden of Forgetting. Now, if you're thinking that sounds like exactly what someone carrying around centuries of traumatic memories would be looking for, you'd be absolutely right. The Garden of Forgetting is this ethereal place where memories can be released, where the burden of the past can be literally set down and left behind, where maybe, just maybe, Ahri could find peace from the endless voices in her head screaming their fears and regrets and joys and sorrows at all hours of the day and night. It's basically like the Runeterra equivalent of clearing your browser history, except the history is existential trauma and the browser is your immortal soul. And also clearing it would mean permanently deleting parts of who you are. The garden exists in a liminal space, not fully in the physical world or the spirit world, but somewhere between, like existing in the space between two dimensions where the normal rules don't quite apply. It's accessible only to those who carry heavy memories and know the hidden paths to reach it, which means you can't just stumble onto it. You have to actively seek it out, have to want it badly enough to spend years searching for the entrance. Ahri had heard whispers of it over the years, from spirits she'd encountered during her wanderings, from ancient Vastaya who spoke of it in legends passed down through generations, from the memories of mystics and spiritual seekers she'd consumed, who had sought it themselves for their own burdens. The descriptions were always vague and contradictory, because apparently mystical locations don't believe in providing good directions, but the core idea was consistent. There was a place where you could forget, where you could release memories that had become too heavy to carry, where you could be free from the past. When she finally found the entrance after decades of searching, hidden in a grove where the cherry blossoms never touched the ground and the air shimmered with spiritual energy, she felt something she hadn't felt in centuries: hope. Hope that maybe she could be free from the weight of all those lives. Hope that maybe she could finally figure out who she actually was beneath all the stolen memories. Hope that maybe she could be just Ahri again instead of Ahri plus 1,000 dead people. The garden itself was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, the kind of beauty that's so intense it's almost painful, like staring at the sun, except the sun is made of concentrated peace and serenity. Flowers bloomed in colors that didn't exist in the normal world, shades that your eyes could see but your brain couldn't quite process, hues that seemed to shift when you looked directly at them. Pools of water reflected memories instead of images, showing scenes from lives that had been released here. Moments of joy and sorrow and everything in between, playing out on the surface like videos on water. Trees whispered the secrets people had left behind, their leaves carrying voices that spoke of things released and burdens set down. Spirits drifted through the garden like smoke, each one representing a memory someone had chosen to abandon, each one a ghost of experience that no longer belonged to anyone. Ahri walked through this place slowly, reverently, and for the first time in centuries, the voices in her head grew quieter. The garden's magic dampened the memories, made them feel distant and less real, like they belonged to someone else, which honestly they did. But normally, they felt like they belonged to her because they were literally inside her mind. It was the closest thing to peace she'd experienced since before her transformation, like finally getting a moment of silence after years of constant noise. She stood at the pool of reflection, the main feature of the garden where memories could be literally released into the water and forgotten forever, where you could watch them play out one final time before letting them go. Ahri was ready. She was so ready. She'd been carrying this weight for centuries, had been drowning under the accumulated trauma of 1,000 lives, and she was ready to let it all go, to release centuries of suffering and trauma and stolen lives into that pool and finally be free. She reached out with her magic, preparing to release the memories, to let them drain out of her like emptying a vessel, like deleting files from an overfull hard drive. And then she hesitated. Because if she let go of all these memories, if she forgot all these people, would she still be Ahri? She'd been carrying these memories for so long that they'd become part of her identity, part of how she understood herself in the world. And more importantly, did these people deserve to be forgotten? They'd died because of her. They'd had their lives stolen, their essences consumed, their final moments filled with confusion and betrayal when they realized the beautiful fox girl was actually killing them. If she forgot them, if she erased them from existence even in her own mind, wasn't that killing them a second time? Wasn't she obligated to remember them, to carry the weight of what she'd done, to honor their lives by keeping their memories alive even if it destroyed her? It's like having the option to delete your match history when it's full of games where you inted, but realizing that deleting it doesn't change the fact that you ruined those games for your teammates. The memories in the pool of reflection showed her everyone she'd consumed, flashing through centuries of faces and lives and deaths, and Ahri stood there frozen, torn between the desperate need for relief and the crushing guilt that said she didn't deserve relief, that forgetting would be the ultimate betrayal. She stayed in the garden for days, maybe weeks, standing at that pool and unable to make the choice. Eventually, she left without releasing the memories, walking away from her chance at peace because she couldn't bring herself to forget the people she'd killed. She'd carry them all forever, every single one, because that was the price she'd decided she had to pay for what she'd done. Now, here's where Ahri tried something absolutely wild. She tried to just stop. She found this small village in rural Ionia called Vlanko, tucked away in the hills where the main roads didn't reach, the kind of place that barely showed up on maps and probably hadn't seen major outside contact in decades. And she decided she was going to stay there, blend in perfectly, and live as a human without feeding on anyone. Because surely, if she just tried hard enough, she could overcome the literal magical curse that defined her entire existence, right? It's like trying to quit League cold turkey after playing for 10 years. Theoretically possible according to that one Reddit post you read. Practically torture according to every lived experience ever. But worth trying because what else are you going to do with your life? Ahri created a whole identity for herself with the meticulous care of someone who'd been creating false identities for centuries, called herself something normal in Ionian that wouldn't raise questions. Maybe Asa or Mira or Lynn, one of those common names that every third person had. She told people she was a weaver who wanted to escape the busier cities, claimed she'd inherited a small amount of money from a deceased relative, and wanted to use it to start a simple, peaceful life. She actually went and bought a legitimate loom and learned to weave properly over weeks of practice, because the best lies are the ones lived truthfully, and also because having an actual profession meant people wouldn't question why she was there. She moved into the village during planting season, when everyone was focused on their fields and an extra pair of hands was welcome, and she helped with the harvest like a normal person, attended the local festivals where people danced and drank rice wine and told stories about their ancestors. She learned their customs in exhaustive detail, their inside jokes that had been developing for generations, which families were feuding over a disputed property line from 30 years ago. And which couple had been in love since childhood, but were too stubborn to admit it. For the first time in centuries, Ahri had neighbors, real neighbors. People would wave to her in the morning as they headed to their fields, invite her to share meals at their homes, ask her opinion on village matters as if she were actually part of the community and not a predator cosplaying as a person. There was an elderly woman named Grandmother Chen, who taught her recipes passed down through her family for 5 generations and told her stories about the village's history going back 100 years. There was a young boy, maybe 8 years old, who'd bring her flowers he'd picked and ask her to tell him stories about the outside world beyond their isolated village. There were farmers who'd help repair her roof when it leaked during storms, and she'd weave them clothes in return, creating actual reciprocal relationships for the first time in her very long life. It was normal. It was peaceful. It was everything Ahri had never thought she could have. And she thought maybe, just maybe, this could work. Maybe she could suppress her hunger long enough to live a normal life, to be part of a community without being the predator hiding among prey, to actually be a person instead of a monster wearing a person's face. She'd wake up each morning and tell herself, today I will not feed. Today I will be human. Today I will be better than my nature. But here's the thing about magical hunger that's literally part of your being, that's woven into your magical essence at a fundamental level. You can't just ignore it through willpower. You can't just decide you're not going to feed the same way you can't decide you're not going to breathe. You can't willpower your way through it like you can't willpower your way out of iron when your fundamentals are garbage and you refuse to practice. The hunger grew stronger every day, gnawing at her insides like your mental after your fourth loss in a row. Except this mental degradation was actually physical. At first it was manageable, like playing with a slight lag, annoying but workable, something you could compensate for with skill and focus. Then it got worse. Her magic started flickering like a bad connection, her fox features becoming harder to hide as her concentration slipped, her movements becoming sluggish as her body began literally consuming itself to make up for the life essence it wasn't receiving. She'd sit at community dinners, surrounded by people laughing and talking and living their normal human lives, and all she could sense was their life essence glowing warm and inviting and calling to that hunger she was desperately trying to ignore. It was like being a recovering addict stuck in a room full of their drug of choice, except the drug is the literal life force of everyone around you, and withdrawal might actually kill you. And also, you're trying to act normal and friendly while your body is screaming at you to feed. Ahri lasted 6 months in Vlanko. 6 months of slowly starving herself, of watching herself deteriorate day by day, of lying to people who had become her friends about why she was growing weaker and paler and more withdrawn. 6 months of white-knuckling her way through every social interaction, while her hunger screamed at her to just feed already, to just take what she needed to survive, to stop this pointless exercise in self-destruction. It was the longest she'd ever gone without feeding since her transformation, and it was killing her. Literally. Let me tell you about the most griefing moment in the entire Vlanko arc. Because of course, Ahri's attempt at normalcy couldn't last, because this is League lore, and nothing good is allowed to exist without being destroyed in the most traumatic way possible. The hunger grew too strong, pushed past the point where willpower mattered at all, past the point where morality could compete with survival, past the point where Ahri had any real choice in the matter. It was winter, the coldest night of the year, and Ahri was dying. Not metaphorically, not in the I feel terrible sense. Literally dying, her body shutting down system by system, her magic almost completely depleted, her consciousness flickering in and out like a bad internet connection during promos, except instead of lag, you're experiencing complete system failure. She stumbled out of her house, barely able to maintain her humanoid form, her 9 tails visible and flickering, her fox ears prominent despite her attempts to hide them, knowing she had maybe hours before her body gave out entirely, and she dissolved back into pure magical energy or whatever happens when Vastaya die from starvation. And she encountered him. Elder Sho, one of the village's most respected members, a kind man in his 70s who had always treated her with grandfatherly warmth, who'd helped her fix her roof that first month, who'd invited her to his family's dinners and treated her like the daughter he'd never had. He was returning home late from checking on a neighbor's sick child, carrying his lantern through the snow, bundled in winter clothes and humming one of the village's traditional songs. He saw Ahri collapsed in the street, barely conscious, and rushed to help her without a moment's hesitation, because that's exactly the kind of person he was. Someone who saw another person in need and immediately tried to help regardless of personal risk or inconvenience. And Ahri, driven to the edge of starvation, driven by an instinct more powerful than consciousness or morality or any of the bonds she'd built over 6 months, gave in. She consumed him. Right there in the street, in the village that had welcomed her, she fed on Eldershow's essence and watched his body crumble to ash in the snow, his lantern falling and extinguishing in the white powder. And the worst part, it wasn't even satisfying. The relief of feeding was immediately drowned by the crushing guilt and the new memories now haunting her consciousness. Memories of Eldershow's long life, his 3 children who'd grown and moved to other villages, his grandchildren he'd visit every summer, the village he'd helped build and protect for decades, the trust he'd placed in the weaver woman who'd seemed so kind and who he'd worried about during her obvious illness. Ahri gained his entire existence and lost whatever remained of her humanity in the same moment. She absorbed 70 years of memories in seconds, experienced his surprise and fear and betrayal as he realized what she was doing, felt his final thought, which was concern that she must have been sick for months and he should have noticed, should have helped her more. The village discovered what she'd done by morning. They found the ash in the street where Eldershow should have been, the signs of spirit magic residue, his distinctive lantern, and they traced it back to Ahri's house, which was empty because she'd already fled into the winter wilderness, running on newly restored energy that felt like acid in her veins. She ran carrying Eldershow's memories along with everyone else's, carrying the knowledge that she'd betrayed every person who had shown her kindness, that she'd proven she really was just a monster incapable of being better. It's like finally getting to your promos after 100 games of grinding, then going on a massive loss streak that drops you 2 divisions lower than where you started. Except the LP you lost was your faith in yourself and your belief that you could be a good person, and there's no climbing back because you've proven definitively that you can't. Vlonko put up warning stones at their village entrance about the fox demon, who had infiltrated their village disguised as a weaver woman who had murdered Eldershow in the street during winter. Ahri never went back, but she carried that failure with her for the next century, the definitive proof that she couldn't be better, couldn't control herself, couldn't escape what she was no matter how hard she tried or how much she wanted to change. All right. So let's talk about one of the most complicated relationships in Ahri's entire existence. Because after Vlonko, after hitting absolute rock bottom emotionally and accepting that she was just a monster wearing a pretty face and pretending at humanity, she met this Ionian scholar who actually figured out what she was, and instead of running or trying to kill her or reporting her to the authorities, he wanted to help her. This guy's name was Hyan, and he was basically the ancient Ionian equivalent of a grad student doing independent research on Vastaya and magical creatures, probably writing some kind of thesis that would revolutionize the field if anyone ever actually read it, spending his life traveling around Ionia collecting folklore and interviewing spirits and examining magical phenomena. He was the kind of person who collected first-hand accounts from people who'd encountered strange beings, who documented regional variations in spirit manifestations, who spent weeks in libraries reading ancient texts about Vastayan bloodlines and magical transformations. And he encountered Ahri by complete accident. She'd been hunting on a remote mountain path, feeding on a bandit she'd tracked for days, and Hyan had been researching nearby spirit shrines for his documentation project. They'd literally bumped into each other in the worst possible moment when Ahri was mid-feed, the bandit's body already crumbling to ash, her fox, features fully visible, her hands still glowing with the magical energy of essence absorption. Most people would have freaked out completely, run away screaming, tried to fight her despite having no chance, gotten themselves killed in the panic. Hyan just stared. Then he pulled out a notebook and started asking questions like he'd just encountered a fascinating new species of butterfly instead of a soul-eating fox demon. He saw her not as a monster, but as a being trapped in circumstances beyond her control, someone who could potentially be saved or at least understood, a living example of magical phenomena that contradicted everything the established literature said about Vastaean transformations. It's like having a support who actually knows what they're doing and doesn't flame you for every mistake. Rare, valuable, slightly suspicious, and you're not entirely sure if they're actually trying to help you or if they have some ulterior motive you haven't figured out yet. Ahri was so shocked by his reaction that she didn't even attack him. She just stood there, fox ears and tails fully visible, the remnants of her latest victim dissolving into essence around her, while this absolute madman pulled out his notebook and ink stick and started sketching her appearance and asking her things like, how does the essence transfer work exactly? Is it a conscious process or automatic once physical contact is established? Do you absorb memories passively, or can you control what you take? What happens if you don't feed? Is it slow deterioration or sudden death? Have you ever tried feeding on non-human sources? And somehow, incredibly, improbably, they started talking. Not immediately. Ari's first instinct was still to kill him, because that's what you do with witnesses. That's how you stay hidden and safe. But Hyen kept talking, kept asking questions with genuine scientific curiosity rather than fear or judgment, and eventually Ahri found herself actually answering him, because when was the last time someone had wanted to understand rather than just condemn her? Hyen explained his research, his theories about how Vastayan magic worked, his hypothesis that her hunger might be fixable if they understood its magical mechanism, his belief that every magical phenomenon had underlying rules that could be understood and potentially manipulated. Ahri, who had spent centuries alone with only the voices of the dead for company, who hadn't had a real conversation with anyone since before Vlonko, found herself actually conversing with someone who knew what she was and wasn't afraid or disgusted. They formed this weird partnership where he'd study her, try to find ways to control or reduce her hunger, document her abilities and limitations, and she'd protect him during his research travels through Ionia's more dangerous regions, because scholars are notoriously bad at defending themselves against bandits and wild animals. It wasn't romantic. Ahri was too traumatized and self-hating for romance, and Hyen was too focused on his research and also maybe asexual based on his complete lack of interest in that entire aspect of human experience. It was more like two people conducting a very long experiment where one person was the scientist and the other was the lab rat. Except the lab rat could kill you at any moment if she got too hungry, and also had centuries of experience manipulating people. For the first time in centuries, Ahri had someone who knew what she was and didn't immediately want her dead. Someone who looked at her curse as a problem to solve rather than a reason to grab torches and pitchforks and form an angry mob. Someone who saw her as a person with a condition rather than just a monster that needed to be destroyed. It was the closest thing to hope she'd felt since the Garden of Forgetting, and it was probably too good to last, but she was going to hold on to it for as long as possible. Let me tell you about the moment Ahri decided to stop being a passive observer and actually do something with the power she'd spent centuries hiding and being ashamed of. During the Noxian invasion, she witnessed a small group of Ionian civilians, including children, maybe 6 or 7 people total, hiding in the ruins of their burned village, being cornered by Noxian soldiers who had been given orders to leave no witnesses. The soldiers had been systematically clearing villages, and they were about to carry out those orders with the casual efficiency of people who'd done this dozens of times before, who'd long since stopped thinking of it as anything other than another task to complete before dinner. And something in Ahri just snapped. Maybe it was all the accumulated memories of people who had loved their homeland, who had built lives in these villages, who had raised families in these houses now burning. Maybe it was Hyan's influence still echoing in her mind, his belief that she could be more than her hunger, his conviction that understanding and knowledge could solve problems. Maybe it was remembering Elder Show and everyone in Blanco, understanding viscerally what it meant for a community to be destroyed, what it meant when ordinary people who'd done nothing wrong got caught in forces beyond their control. Maybe she was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being a monster when she could at least try to be a monster who did something useful, who used her curse to protect instead of just to feed. Or maybe she just looked at those Noxian soldiers about to murder children and decided that if she was going to be a monster anyway, she might as well be a monster who deleted people who actually deserved it. Whatever the reason, and honestly, it was probably all of those things combined, Ahri stepped out of the shadows and absolutely obliterated those Noxian soldiers with the kind of efficiency that would make a Fed assassin look balanced. She used her charm magic to confuse them first, made them see her as their greatest desire, or their commanding officer, or whatever their minds were most susceptible to. And in that moment of disorientation, she struck. Her orb of spirit energy blasted through their armor like it was cardboard, and when they fell, she consumed their essence without hesitation or guilt. For the first time in her existence, she fed on life essence without feeling like a monster. Because these weren't innocents. These were invaders who had been about to murder children, and they had made their choice to come here and hurt people. It's like finally finding a morally acceptable way to get fed in game, except the game is real life, and the stakes are actual survival, and also you're saving people instead of just farming for gold. The civilians she saved stared at her with a mixture of terror and gratitude, not sure whether this fox spirit with 9 tails who had just killed 6 trained soldiers in seconds was their savior or just another threat they needed to run from. Ahri didn't stick around to explain or accept thanks. She melted back into the forest before they could ask questions or spread word about her. But something had changed in her. For the first time in centuries, she'd used her power to protect rather than just to feed. She'd made a choice to act rather than hide, to intervene rather than just observe from the shadows. And over the following months and years as the war raged across Ionia, Ahri kept making that choice. She'd track Noxian patrols through the forests, using skills she'd developed over centuries of hunting, but applying them to soldiers instead of random travelers. She'd ambush squads who were hunting civilians, use her charm magic to lure officers into traps, where she could consume them and gain intelligence about Noxian plans and troop movements. She became a ghost story among the Noxian ranks. Tales of a fox demon that hunted soldiers in the night, that could make you fall in love with her right before she killed you. That left no bodies behind because she consumed essence completely. The soldiers started carrying charms against spirits, started traveling in larger groups, started avoiding certain forests entirely because too many of their comrades had gone in and never come out. The Ionians who caught glimpses of her weren't sure what she was either. Fox spirit, vengeful ghost, protective kami. But some started calling her a guardian, a spirit who had taken fox form to defend the land against invaders. Ahri didn't correct them, didn't reveal herself, didn't try to claim credit. Let them think what they wanted. For once in her very long life, her hunger was serving a purpose beyond just keeping her alive. For once, the people she killed deserved it. For once, she could feed without the crushing guilt that normally accompanied every meal. Now here's where it gets interesting, because during the war, Ahri encountered other Vastaya, her own people, the magical beings she'd been separated from since her transformation centuries ago when her tribe had cast her out for being wrong and dangerous. They were organizing resistance against Noxus, using their innate magic and connection to the land to fight back against the invasion in ways human defenders couldn't match. Vastaya could shapeshift to infiltrate enemy camps disguised as local wildlife, could commune with the forest spirits to gather intelligence about troop movements, could use nature magic in ways that the Noxian invaders, who came from a more technologically advanced but less magically attuned culture, had no defense against. It was guerrilla warfare with actual magical guerrillas, and it was surprisingly effective at disrupting Noxian supply lines and coordination. And for the first time in centuries, Ahri met beings who understood what she was on a fundamental level, who had similar magical natures even if the specifics were different, who didn't see her as a monster, but as one of them, as kin. It's like finally finding your main role after playing Phil for 3 seasons straight. Suddenly, everything makes more sense because you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. A group of Vastayan fighters encountered her after she'd ambushed a Noxian patrol, and instead of attacking her or fleeing from her, they recognized what she was. Fox Vastaya, they called her, sister, kin, one of the ancient bloodlines. They invited her to their camp, introduced her to other shapeshifters, Tiger Vastaya with strength that could match Noxian war machines, Bird Vastaya who served as scouts and messengers, Serpent Vastaya whose venom could take down armored soldiers. They all fought for Ionia in their own ways, using their gifts to protect their homeland. They welcomed Ahri, taught her about her heritage that she'd never learned because she'd been separated from her people before coming of age, explained the magical bloodlines she'd never understood because she'd been stuck in fox form during the crucial teaching years. They showed her that her fox form wasn't a curse, but a gift, that her connection to magic was something to embrace rather than fear. That being Vastaya meant being part of something larger than herself. For a few weeks, maybe months, Ahri trained with them, learned Vastayan fighting techniques that used both physical and magical abilities in combination, practiced the shape-shifting she'd never properly mastered because her transformation had been so traumatic and wrong. She learned to shift between fox and humanoid forms smoothly, instead of the awkward partial transformations she'd been doing for centuries. She learned Vastayan meditation techniques that could help her control her magic more precisely. She learned their war songs and their stories, and felt, for a brief moment, like she might actually belong somewhere. But here's the complicated part. They also expected her to be like them, to have their values and understand their culture and fit into their society. And Ahri had spent so long consuming human memories that she was more human than Vastayan at this point. The other Vastaya didn't understand why she hesitated before killing, why she seemed haunted by every death even when it was justified, why she carried such obvious guilt and self-loathing. To them, fighting invaders was righteous and clear-cut. Protect Ionia, drive out Noxus, use whatever power necessary to defend your homeland. They didn't understand that Ahri carried the memories of everyone she killed, that she experienced their deaths from their perspective, that even justified killing added to the chorus of voices in her head and made her identity crisis worse. They also didn't fully understand her hunger, because normal Vastaya didn't need to consume life essence to survive. They could sense something different about her, something off in her magical signature that marked her as unusual even among Vastaya, but they didn't grasp the full horror of her condition. Ahri tried to explain once, tried to tell them about the hunger and the memories and the centuries of guilt, but they looked at her with a mixture of pity and incomprehension. Some suggested she visit their elders who might know ancient rituals to help. Others simply accepted it as her unique burden to carry. But none of them truly understood, and Ahri realized that even among her own kind, she was fundamentally alone. She left the Vastayan resistance after several months, grateful for what they'd taught her about her heritage and her abilities, but unable to truly belong even among people who should have been her natural community. She was too human for the Vastaya and too Vastayan for the humans, stuck in between like her actual physical form, belonging nowhere and to no one. Alright, so let's talk about what happened when Ahri tried to be a hero during the war. Because, spoiler alert, having good intentions doesn't magically fix centuries of trauma and a hunger you can barely control even on your best days. Ahri fought alongside various Ionian resistance groups over the years of the Noxian invasion, sometimes working with the Vastaya, sometimes with human defenders, sometimes alone depending on what the situation required. She used her powers to protect villages from raiding parties, to push back enemy forces that were advancing into previously safe territories, to assassinate Noxian commanders whose deaths would disrupt entire operations. She was good at it too. Really good. Good enough that she started developing a reputation among both sides, even though few people had actually seen her clearly. Her charm magic could confuse entire squads of soldiers, making them turn on each other or wander off cliffs or simply stand frozen while she struck. Her mobility made her nearly impossible to catch or pin down. She could move through forests like a ghost, navigate terrain that would stop armored soldiers, escape from any ambush or trap. And her life essence absorption meant she could heal herself with every kill, essentially making her a self-sustaining assassin with infinite sustain as long as there were enemies to consume. Sounds great, right? Like the perfect kit for carrying your team in a war. Except Ahri wasn't fighting against practice dummies or NPCs. She was fighting an actual war, with Ionians fighting and dying around her, with chaos and blood and magic flying in every direction, with the fog of war being literal fog mixed with smoke from burning buildings. And when you're in the chaos of battle, when adrenaline is pumping and instinct takes over, when you're surrounded by dying people releasing their essence into the air, it becomes really hard to control that hunger with any precision. There were moments, multiple moments that haunted her even worse than her normal guilt, where Ahri wasn't sure if she'd consumed a Noxian soldier or an allied Ionian who had been too close when she fed, who had been wounded and dying anyway, but whose essence she might have absorbed while trying to feed on enemies. In the heat of combat, life essence all felt the same, all called to her hunger with equal intensity regardless of whose life it represented. It's like trying to CS perfectly while being ganked by 3 people, and your screen is covered in particle effects and you're lagging. Sure, you might get some minions, but you're probably also going to accidentally auto the wrong thing, and in this case, the wrong thing means possibly consuming your own allies and adding their memories to your collection, while their families wait for them to come home from a battle they'll never return from. The first time Ahri realized she'd consumed an Ionian ally, she nearly broke down completely. She absorbed his memories and saw his life flash before her. His wife, his children, his reasons for fighting, his hope that the war would end soon and he could return to his farm. And she'd accidentally killed him while trying to protect other Ionians from a Noxian squad. The guilt was overwhelming, made worse by the fact that she wasn't even sure how many times it had happened, because battle is chaotic and essence absorption is fast, and sometimes you don't get clear memories immediately. Ahri started fighting alone after that, refusing to coordinate with other Ionian defenders because the risk was too high, because she couldn't trust herself not to accidentally consume allies in the chaos of battle. She'd take on missions that no one else could handle, infiltrating deep behind enemy lines to sabotage supply depots, assassinating Noxian commanders in their own camps, disrupting communications between different Noxian forces. Solo queue gameplay, where she didn't have to worry about accidentally killing her teammates, where every enemy she faced was definitely an enemy, and feeding on them was definitely justified. But fighting alone meant no backup, no support, no one to cover your mistakes or help when you got overwhelmed. She took wounds that would have killed normal fighters, survived only by consuming enough essence to heal herself, adding more and more voices to her already overcrowded mind. Every Noxian soldier she killed in the name of defending Ionia was still a person she'd consumed, still memories she'd carry forever, still another identity added to her fractured sense of self. The war made her powerful and devastated her psyche in equal measure. By the time Ionia finally managed to push back the Noxian forces through a combination of resistance efforts, Vastaean magic, Noxus overextending their supply lines, and internal political struggles in the Noxian capital that diverted resources away from the invasion, Ahri had killed hundreds more people and absorbed every single one of them. She was stronger than she'd ever been, more skilled at using her abilities, more confident in her combat capabilities. And she was more broken than ever before, carrying the weight of a war's worth of deaths in her mind alongside all the centuries of victims that had come before. Let me tell you about the absolute existential crisis Ahri went through after the war ended. Because while Ionia was picking up the pieces and rebuilding and trying to process the collective trauma of a multi-year invasion, Ahri was having the mother of all identity crises. She had centuries of human memories taking up space in her mind, a Vastaean body she'd barely learned to control even after all this time. Fox instincts she still barely understood because she'd transformed so young, and a moral compass that had been shaped by literally thousands of different people's lives and values and beliefs, all contradicting each other. The war had given her purpose for a while. Fight invaders, protect Ionia, use her, curse for something good, feed without guilt because her targets were legitimate enemies. But now the war was over. Most of the Noxian forces had withdrawn or been defeated, and she was back to just existing. A monster trying to figure out how to be a person when the definition of person kept changing based on which set of memories was most prominent in her mind at any given moment. Who was she really? Was she the fox kit who had stumbled onto magic by accident centuries ago, curious and innocent and not responsible for any of this? Was she the sum of all the people she'd consumed, their memories and personalities blending into something new that had transcended her original identity? Was she the monster who had murdered innocents for centuries just to survive, who had killed Elder Show and betrayed Vlanko's trust? Was she the hero who had fought for Ionia against Noxus, who had saved villages and protected civilians? It's like checking your match history and realizing you have games on every single champion in the roster with roughly equal play time, and you genuinely have no idea who you actually main, except the champions are identities, and the match history is your entire life. Ahri started traveling again after the war, not to hunt this time. Though she still had to feed occasionally, still had to find bandits or criminals or other morally acceptable targets, but to search for something that could tell her who she actually was beneath all the accumulated trauma and stolen memories and centuries of self-hatred. She visited the places from her earliest memories as a fox kit, trying to reconnect with that original self that had existed before the curse. She found the grove where her Vastaean parents had lived. They were long dead now, centuries having passed, and the grove itself was overgrown and forgotten, reclaimed by wild nature. She tried to remember what it had felt like to be that simple fox kit, but too many other memories interfered, too many other childhoods overlapping with hers. She visited the spot where she'd consumed that first hunter, the moment that had changed everything and set her on this path. Nothing there but forest, no marker, no indication that a life had ended and a curse had begun, and everything had gone wrong, right there in that small clearing. She traveled to every place that had been significant in her long existence. The Garden of Forgetting, where she'd almost released her memories, but couldn't bring herself to forget her victims. The ruins of the village of Vlanko, where warning stones still stood even though most of the original residents had died or moved away. The temple where Hien had died trying to cure her, and she'd accidentally consumed her only friend. She was retracing her own history, trying to find some thread of continuity that would tell her who Ahri actually was when you stripped away everything else, when you got down to whatever core identity remained beneath centuries of accumulated trauma. But every place just gave her more questions instead of answers. She couldn't find herself in the past because her past was a maze of stolen lives and bad decisions and circumstances beyond her control, and moments where she tried to be better but failed. So maybe the answer wasn't in who she had been, but in who she chose to be going forward. Maybe identity wasn't something you discovered, but something you constructed through choices and actions. Maybe she couldn't change her past, but she could choose her future, could decide what kind of monster she wanted to be, even if being fully not a monster wasn't actually an option. Okay, so this next part is absolutely unhinged, because Ahri decided that if the physical world couldn't give her answers about her identity, maybe the spiritual realm could, because surely ancient spirits would have wisdom about identity crises and curses that physical world solutions couldn't provide. Ionia is full of places where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds is thin. Ancient shrines built on ley line intersections, sacred mountains where reality gets weird, spirit wells where the veil between realities almost dissolves entirely, and you can hear whispers from the other side. Ahri started seeking these places out systematically after the war, traveling to every documented spiritual site she could find, and many undocumented ones she discovered through rumor or stolen memories, trying to commune with ancient spirits who might understand her nature better than she did herself. She meditated in sacred groves for days at a time, entering trance states where her consciousness could brush against the spirit realm without fully crossing over, experiencing visions that might have been spiritual wisdom or might have been hallucinations from sitting still too long without eating. She performed rituals at spirit wells, offering her own magical energy in exchange for wisdom or guidance, trying to get the attention of spirits powerful enough to help. She even risked entering the spirit realm itself multiple times, which, for the record, is basically like playing League on the PBE server where everything is broken, nothing makes sense. The rules are more like gentle suggestions, and you're never quite sure if what you're experiencing is a bug or a feature. The spirit realm doesn't follow physical laws the way the material world does. Time moves differently there. You might spend what feels like minutes and return to find days have passed, or experience weeks of subjective time that takes only seconds in the physical world. Space folds in on itself so that distances become meaningless, where you can walk north for hours and end up south of where you started, where east and west become concepts rather than directions. And the entities you encounter range from benevolent nature spirits who want to help maintain balance to things that would make fiddlesticks look cuddly and wholesome, entities that exist beyond mortal comprehension and don't really care if you go insane trying to understand them. Ahri encountered spirits of all kinds during her searching. Ancient fox spirits who remembered her parents, who told her stories about the Vastayan bloodlines that had produced her, who claimed she was descended from a particularly powerful line that had produced legendary shapeshifters and magical warriors. Nature spirits who could sense the corruption in her essence, the taint of all those consumed lives making her magical signature wrong and off-putting, and who either pitied her or condemned her depending on their disposition and personal philosophy. Human spirits, too. Echoes of people long dead, who existed now only as spiritual impressions, lingering memories of people who'd lived and died centuries or millennia ago. Some of these were people she'd consumed, their spirits still lingering in the realm between life and death, because being consumed by Ahri apparently prevented normal spiritual progression, and those encounters were absolutely devastating. Imagine meeting the ghost of someone you killed and consumed, and they recognize you because part of them still exists inside your mind, because they can sense their own memories living in your head. They'd look at her with expressions ranging from confusion to horror to anger to pity, and Ahri had no words to explain or justify or apologize sufficiently. The spirit she encountered gave her cryptic advice that honestly sounds like something your solo queue teammates would type in all chat after you'd asked a simple question. Technically words, possibly meaningful in some context, but ultimately confusing and not particularly useful for solving your actual problem. One ancient tree spirit told her that her hunger was a test of balance, that she must learn to feed without consuming, to take only what was freely given while respecting the sanctity of life. Extremely helpful advice, except nobody was freely offering their life essence, and taking it without consent was literally the problem she was trying to solve. Another spirit claimed her curse could only be lifted by sacrificing what she valued most, which was simultaneously too vague to be actionable and also concerning, because what did she value most? Her life? Her memories? Her remaining shreds of humanity? A third spirit told her she was exactly what she was supposed to be, that her existence served some greater cosmic purpose she couldn't understand from her limited mortal perspective, that the suffering she'd experienced and caused was necessary for some future event that would justify everything. Cool, thanks, spirits. Very helpful. Definitely cleared everything up and didn't just add more existential confusion to the pile. But through all these spiritual encounters, the confusing advice and the disturbing confrontations and the occasional genuine moments of wisdom, Ahri did learn some things. She learned that her condition was truly unprecedented in a way that even the Vastaya hadn't fully grasped, that the spirits had never seen anything quite like her blend of Vastayan magic and life essence consumption, that she was essentially a unique phenomenon in Runeterra's magical ecosystem. She learned that her hunger was tied fundamentally to her magical nature in ways that couldn't be easily separated. That severing it would mean severing her connection to magic entirely, essentially lobotomizing her magical self, and leaving her as a normal fox or a magicless humanoid depending on what form she was in when it happened. She learned that the Garden of Forgetting was still there, still waiting, still offering its promise of release from memory if she ever chose to accept it, if she ever decided that forgetting was worth the cost of becoming someone new, without all that accumulated baggage. And she learned that maybe there wasn't a clean solution to her problem, that maybe some curses can't be lifted and some problems can't be solved, that maybe the best she could do was learn to live with her nature while trying to be better than it. Now here's where Ahri's story gets to something resembling hope, because after centuries of self-hatred and running from herself, and desperately trying to be something she wasn't, and failing repeatedly in increasingly traumatic ways, Ahri finally started to accept a difficult truth. She might never be fully human, or fully Vastayan, or fully free from her hunger, and that might have to be okay. This wasn't some magical moment of enlightenment where all her problems vanished like LP after a loss streak, where everything suddenly made sense, and she achieved inner peace and became a better person overnight. There was no sudden revelation, no spiritual awakening, no magical cure that fixed everything, no wise mentor who appeared with all the answers. Instead, it was the slow, painful realization over years and decades that she had to live with her nature while also choosing every single day to be better than it, to use it in ways that minimized harm and maybe even produced some good. She couldn't change what she was, a Vastayan fox spirit cursed with an addiction to life essence that would never go away. She couldn't undo the centuries of people she'd consumed or erase the memories that haunted her, or resurrect the victims or take back any of the harm she'd caused. She couldn't become human, no matter how many human memories she carried or how long she lived among them. She couldn't go back to being a simple fox kit living with her Vastayan tribe before everything went wrong. But she could choose how she used her power going forward. She could choose who she fed on, could limit her hunting to people who had made choices that put them outside normal moral protection, bandits who preyed on travelers, corrupt officials who abused their power, violent criminals who posed threats to innocents, Noxian remnants still causing trouble in Ionia years after the invasion officially ended. It's like accepting that you're hard stuck in your current rank, but deciding to focus on improving anyway, not because you'll definitely climb, or because climbing is guaranteed, but because the effort itself matters, because playing with purpose and trying to improve is better than inting or giving up or running it down mid. Ahri started developing a code for herself, rules she'd follow even when the hunger made her desperate, even when breaking them would be easier, even when following them meant suffering. She'd only feed on those who deserved it by some reasonable moral standard, would research her targets. When possible to verify they'd actually done something that justified being her food. She'd hunt predators instead of innocents, use her curse to remove dangerous people from the world while sustaining herself, make her survival at least serve some social function beyond just keeping herself alive. It wasn't perfect. She was still consuming people, still taking lives, still adding memories to her collection, still experiencing their deaths and carrying their stories. But at least now she could look at herself and see someone trying to do better rather than just a monster feeding indiscriminately on whoever was convenient. She also started helping people where she could, using her powers for protection without expecting anything in return, not trying to earn redemption because you can't really redeem centuries of murder, but because helping was better than not helping. She'd warn villages about incoming bandit raids using information she'd gained from consuming previous raiders, guide lost travelers to safety, use her charm magic to diffuse violent situations before they escalated into bloodshed, intervene when she witnessed injustice or cruelty. Small acts that were easily dismissed or forgotten, that nobody would write songs about or remember for very long, but they mattered to her. They were proof that she could be more than her hunger, that she could use her power for something other than just survival, that she could be something resembling good, even if she'd never actually be good enough to offset the harm she'd caused. And slowly, very slowly, over years and decades of conscious effort and repeated choices, Ahri started building something that almost resembled peace with herself. Not happiness, because happiness seemed like too much to ask for when you're an immortal monster carrying centuries of guilt. Not contentment, because how can you be content when you hear the voices of your victims every time you close your eyes? But acceptance. Acceptance that she was broken and cursed and carrying trauma that would never fully heal. That she'd never be free from the memories or the hunger or the knowledge of what she'd done. But also acceptance that she could still choose to be something other than just a monster, that her curse didn't have to define every aspect of her existence, that she could use her power to protect rather than just prey, even if it didn't erase her past. She'd never be the hero Ionia deserved, never be the person Heian had believed she could become, never be free from the voices in her head or the hunger in her essence, never achieved the redemption she'd spent centuries seeking. But she could be Ahri, flawed and haunted, and trying her best in a world that had never given her an instruction manual for how to be a fox spirit with a severe identity crisis and a soul-eating addiction she didn't ask for and couldn't escape. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Maybe trying to be better was sufficient even if you never actually achieved good. Maybe the effort mattered even when the results were imperfect. Maybe you could build something worth having even on a foundation of mistakes and trauma and all the wrong choices that had led you here. Ahri didn't have answers to all these questions, and she suspected she never would, But she was going to keep trying anyway, keep choosing to use her power to protect rather than just consume. Keep building that fragile sense of purpose and self-worth one small act at a time. Because the alternative was giving up, and she'd survived too long to give up now. So tonight, as you close your eyes in your warm bed with your phone charging next to you and your mental only slightly destroyed from whatever ranked game you played earlier, just remember, at least you're not Ahri. At least you didn't spend centuries consuming the souls of innocent people just to survive. At least you didn't accidentally transform into a different species by eating someone's life essence. At least your identity crisis is just about which role to main, and not about whether you're actually yourself or just a collection of thousands of dead people's memories, all fighting for control of the same body. Because yeah, your LP gains might be terrible, your promos might feel cursed, your teammates might run it down, and your jungle might have the pathing of someone who's never seen a map before. But at least when you close the game, you can actually close it. You can Alt F4 and walk away and do something else. Ahri doesn't get to log off from her existence. She doesn't get to take a break from the hunger or the memories or the voices of everyone she's consumed over the past several centuries. She's stuck in the longest game of League ever played, except the game is her life, and there's no surrender button, and the only way to keep playing is to kill other players for real. At least you just feed in game. She has to actually feed on people to survive. At least your worst memories are bad ranked games and missed skill shots. Hers are the dying moments of thousands of people who trusted her right before she consumed their entire existence. At least when you have an identity crisis, it's about whether you're a top lane or mid lane player. Hers is about whether she's even still Ahri anymore, or just a fox-shaped container holding the memories of everyone she's killed. And you know what? Despite all of that, despite the curse she never asked for, despite the centuries of loneliness and self-hatred, despite killing her only friend and betraying the only community that ever accepted her, she's still trying. She's still choosing every single day to be better than her nature. She's still protecting people, even though nobody will ever thank her or know her name or understand what she sacrifices to keep them safe. She's still fighting to hold on to whatever small piece of herself remains beneath all those stolen memories. So when you're lying there, drifting off to sleep, maybe think about Ahri wandering through the forests of Ionia tonight. Still hunting, still feeding, still carrying the weight of centuries, still trying to be something resembling good despite being fundamentally cursed, still protecting a homeland that doesn't even know she exists, that would probably hunt her down if they knew what she really was. Still holding on to hope that maybe someday she'll figure out who she actually is beneath everything else. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that you should be grateful you're not cursed with soul-eating hunger, though. Honestly, you should be. But that trying matters even when you're never going to be perfect. That choosing to be better counts even when you can't change what you fundamentally are. That you can build something meaningful even on a foundation of mistakes and trauma and all the wrong choices that led you here. Because League lore may be dark and tragic and honestly pretty messed up when you really think about it for more than 5 seconds. But at least we just have to experience it as stories. We get to hear about Ahri suffering from the safety of our beds, with our snacks nearby, and our responsibilities limited to not inting our next ranked game. She has to actually live it, forever, with no breaks and no peace and no escape, except the small moments of purpose she's managed to carve out for herself. So sleep well tonight, gamers. Rest easy knowing that no matter how hard your ranked grind gets, no matter how many times you get demoted or how badly your promos go, no matter how toxic your teammates are or how impossible climbing feels, At least you're not carrying around the memories of thousands of dead people while desperately trying to figure out who you are beneath all the stolen identities. At least you just play a fox girl with charm and dashes. You don't have to be one. Sweet dreams. May your LP gains be blessed and your mental unbroken. And hey, next time you lock in Ahri mid and delete someone's ADC from Fog of War, maybe spare a thought for what that champion has actually been through, for the centuries of suffering behind every ability you cast, for the monster trying desperately to be something more than her curse. GG. Sleep tight, and remember, at least you're not living in Runeterra. Because honestly, that place is absolutely unhinged, and we're all much better off just visiting it through lore videos at 2 a.m. when we should definitely be sleeping. Good night, League Addicts. Tomorrow's another day to chase LP and question your life choices. But for now, rest easy. You've earned it. Unlike Ahri, who hasn't had a moment of real peace in about 400 years. Anyway, that's her story. The Fox of Lost Memories. The Nine-Tailed Soul Eater. The monster trying to be something better. The Vestayan cursed with humanity's worst addiction. She's still out there, somewhere in Ionia's forests, still hunting, still trying, still carrying everyone she's ever consumed, still hoping that maybe, someday, trying will be enough. Sleep well, gamers. Don't let the fiddlesticks bite.